3 patrol cars boxed me into my own driveway while my twins watched from the front porch. My entitled neighbor stood across the street with her phone still in her hand, telling the dispatcher I was using military intimidation tactics for parking at my own house. The smell of fresh asphalt from roadwork mixed with diesel from my government pickup as the officers approached, hands resting on their belts. "Sir, we received a complaint about threatening behavior," one of them said carefully. Linda Ashford watched with that tight little smile Karens get when they think they've finally won. What she didn't realize was that the man she'd just tried to have arrested was the one who would be deciding her next command appearance, and her phone call was about to change her life completely. What would you do if someone called the cops on you for blocking your own driveway? My name's Marcus Hendricks, and 3 months ago I thought my biggest problem was managing 12,000 soldiers at Fort Carson, Colorado. Turns out one 52-year-old HOA treasurer named Linda Ashford would prove more challenging than any insurgent I'd faced during 3 deployments to Afghanistan. The crunch of gravel under my combat boots had become a daily ritual as I walked my property line each morning at 0630. With my wife Sarah deployed to Germany and 10-year-old twins Jake and Emma to manage alone, I needed our Maplewood subdivision to feel like sanctuary. Add my 73-year-old father's worsening dementia to the mix, and you'll understand why peace at home wasn't just preferred, it was essential. Dad fought in Vietnam, earned a Purple Heart, and now some days he doesn't recognize the son who followed in his military footsteps. But he always perks up when he hears my command voice echoing through the house during morning PT preparation. The smell of fresh coffee brewing at 0530 reminds him of field kitchens from 50 years ago, and for those brief moments, his eyes clear with recognition. Linda moved in across the street 6 months ago, right after her husband got passed over for a lucrative base maintenance contract worth $2.3 million. From day one, she made it crystal clear that military families were bringing down property values with our transient lifestyle. Never mind that I'd lived in that house 8 years, longer than most civilians on the block. The woman drove a white BMW SUV that she kept parked at exactly the same angle every day, like she was conducting some kind of suburban military formation. Her lawn was maintained with the precision of a putting green, and she had the kind of fake smile that could cut glass when she wanted something from you. The first incident happened on a Tuesday in September. I'd parked my F-150 in my own driveway, angled slightly to make room for the kids' bikes, when Linda stormed across the street clutching her smartphone like it was evidence in a murder trial. Her perfectly manicured nails, the kind that cost more than most soldiers make in a day, tapped against the screen as she took photos of my truck. "This is a residential neighborhood, not a military base," she announced, her voice carrying that particular pitch of manufactured authority that screams, "I peaked in high school student government." That truck blocked sightlines for emergency vehicles. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering her own SUV was roughly the size of a small aircraft carrier. I kept my tone level, the way we're trained when dealing with hostile locals overseas. "Ma'am, this is my private property. Military personnel need to follow civilian regulations just like everyone else," she snapped back, already dialing. "Hello, police. I need to report intimidating behavior from a neighbor who thinks his uniform gives him special privileges." Within 20 minutes, Officer Martinez arrived. He knew me from community liaison meetings, knew my record, knew this whole situation was more ridiculous than a soup sandwich. But protocol demanded he take the complaint seriously. I could see the embarrassment in his eyes as he went through the motions, asking questions he knew were pointless while Linda stood behind him nodding like a bobblehead doll. That night, I stood on my back deck listening to the rustle of cottonwood leaves and watching my father tend his tomato garden, the only activity that still brought him consistent peace through the fog of his condition. The old man's weathered hands moved with muscle memory, staking plants with the same precision he'd once used to field strip an M16 in total darkness. "Marcus," he said, his voice unusually clear, "that woman reminds me of the political officers in Saigon. Same eyes, same need to control everyone around them for no good reason." Even through the advancing haze of his dementia, Dad had Linda Ashford pegged perfectly. I started noticing patterns then. The way Linda positioned herself at her front window during school pickup time, phone ready like she was conducting surveillance. How she'd emerge from her house with suspicious timing whenever military families were outside. The methodical precision of her complaints suggested someone with too much time and too much misplaced authority. 23 years in military intelligence teaches you to recognize systematic behavior when you see it. This wasn't random neighborhood friction. This was targeted harassment with operational planning behind it. The manila folder labeled Ashford, Linda, Incident Documentation grew thicker by the week. By the following Thursday, it contained 7 HOA violation notices, all filed within 10 days. Military vehicle and residential driveway, apparently my F-150 qualified as combat equipment. Excessive noise during quiet hours, me starting my truck at 0630 for PT counted as disturbing the peace. Unauthorized fence modification. I'd repaired a loose board that was literally falling off and creating a safety hazard. These violations weren't random complaints from a cranky neighbor dealing with her own issues. They were surgical in their specificity, citing obscure subsections of HOA bylaws that most residents didn't know existed. Someone had spent serious time studying our community covenant documents, looking for ammunition. Linda had weaponized bureaucracy with the efficiency of a seasoned military strategist. The smell of fresh printed papers filled my home office as I spread out the citations, looking for patterns the way I'd once analyzed enemy communication intercepts. Each violation referenced different subsections, different witnesses, different times of day. This wasn't the work of an angry neighbor. This was systematic documentation designed to build a legal case. Friday evening brought the real escalation that made my blood pressure spike higher than a Black Hawk at altitude. Emma burst through the front door, tears streaming down her 8-year-old face like she'd just watched her favorite toy get run over by a tank. "Daddy," she sobbed, "Mrs. Ellie said I can't be safety patrol captain anymore because our family might move away soon." The metallic taste of anger flooded my mouth as I knelt to Emma's eye level, keeping my voice steady despite wanting to put my fist through the nearest wall. "Who told Mrs. Ellie we were moving, sweetheart?" "Some moms at the school meeting. They said military families are transient and shouldn't get important jobs because we don't really belong here." Jake appeared behind his sister, 10-year-old fists clenched tight enough to turn his knuckles white. "Tommy Morrison's mom said we're just passing through and taking opportunities from real families." I hugged both kids, feeling their small bodies shake with confusion and hurt that no child should have to experience. The sound of their sniffling mixed with the evening news playing in the background, creating a soundtrack of injustice that burned in my chest like heartburn from bad MRE coffee. Over their heads, I caught sight of Dad watching from his recliner, his eyes sharp with the kind of clarity that came in random waves through his condition. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod, the same look he'd worn when briefing me about suspicious neighborhood patterns during my teenage years. That night, after tucking the kids into bed and assuring them we weren't going anywhere, I made a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead and opened my laptop. If Linda Ashford wanted to play intelligence games, she'd just activated someone with 23 years of experience in that particular field. First stop, HOA records for the past 2 years, all available as public information online. Here's something most people don't know about HOA documents. They're required by law to maintain detailed violation records, including the name of complainants and resolution outcomes. It's like having access to enemy communication logs. Translation: every complaint Linda filed was documented with timestamps, witnesses, and outcomes. The pattern emerged within an hour of analysis, clear as enemy movement on thermal imaging. Military families received 73% of all violations despite comprising only 23% of the neighborhood population. Civilians got polite warnings for the same infractions that earned us formal citations and fines. Master Sergeant Rodriguez next door, 8 violations in 6 months, including excessive lawn maintenance for keeping military standard grass height. Captain Williams across the street, 12 violations in 4 months, cited for intimidating decorations because he flew an American flag larger than city code allowed. Lieutenant Bailey on Maple Court, 15 violations in 3 months, written up for disruptive vehicle operation because his diesel truck made noise starting up for early morning PT. The data painted a picture uglier than a combat zone latrine. But raw intelligence without proper analysis is just meaningless numbers on a screen. I needed ground truth to verify what the documents were telling me. Saturday morning's reconnaissance jog revealed the smoking gun I'd been looking for. Linda's house had the exact same fence modification I'd been cited for. Hers installed 6 months earlier with no violation notice in sight. Her husband's diesel pickup was louder than a generator at full throttle, rumbling to life every morning at 0645. But somehow that didn't qualify as excessive noise worthy of citation. By Sunday evening, I documented a systematic pattern of discrimination that would make a civil rights lawyer start calculating billable hours. The evidence was overwhelming, undeniable, and completely damning. But I needed more than patterns and documentation. I needed to understand the full scope of Linda's operation and identify her network of co-conspirators. Monday brought escalation that hit closer to home than incoming mortar fire. Emma came home from school clutching a crumpled permission slip for the gifted and talented program, the same program she'd tested into 2 months earlier with scores that put her in the 95th percentile. "They said there might not be room after all," she whispered, not meeting my eyes. The smell of fresh crayons and disappointment clung to her backpack like a sad perfume. Jake's story was worse. 3 military kids had been removed from student government positions because, according to the new parent committee, families with uncertain housing stability shouldn't hold leadership roles that required long-term commitment to school community values. I read those words twice, feeling my jaw clench tighter with each syllable. Someone was spreading poison through the school system like a biological weapon, and I had a pretty good idea who was leading that particular campaign. The sound of my coffee mug hitting the kitchen counter probably woke half the neighborhood. Sarah would have recognized that particular noise. It meant her husband was shifting from annoyed to operational planning mode. Wednesday evening's school board meeting confirmed my suspicions. I sat in the back row, watching Linda Ashford work the room like a seasoned politician running for mayor of Entitlement City. She'd organized what she called the Concerned Mothers Coalition, a group of 6 women who'd apparently appointed themselves guardians of educational stability. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead as Linda took the podium, wearing a navy blue blazer that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager." Her presentation materials were professionally printed, color-coordinated, and organized with military precision. Ironic, considering her target audience. "Military families, while we certainly appreciate their service," Linda announced with the kind of fake sincerity that could choke a horse, "bring inherent instability to our children's learning environment. Constant relocations, deployment stress, and frankly, behavioral issues from combat exposure create disruption that impacts all our kids." And the woman actually used air quotes when she said behavioral issues about veterans in public at a school board meeting. I watched her presentation with the same clinical detachment I'd used to analyze enemy propaganda overseas. She'd done her homework. Statistics about military family mobility rates, carefully selected studies about deployment impacts on children, even charts showing academic performance variations in districts with high military populations. It was professional-grade character assassination disguised as educational concern. Her PowerPoint slides were slick, her talking points rehearsed, and her audience nodding along like dashboard bobbleheads. Most civilians have no idea how to counter well-prepared misinformation campaigns, especially when they're delivered by someone who looks like their neighbor's concerned mother. But Linda made one crucial mistake that night. She got cocky and decided to make her campaign personal. "Take Colonel Hendrix's family, for example," she said, pointing toward my general direction without actually looking at me. Constant complaints from neighbors about intimidation tactics, property violations, and now his children are struggling to adapt to civilian school expectations. This is exactly the kind of disruptive influence we need to minimize. The taste of copper flooded my mouth as every muscle in my body tensed. She'd just declared war on my kids in public, using lies and half-truths as her ammunition. That's when I realized Linda Ashford wasn't just targeting my family. She was conducting a full-spectrum campaign against every military family in the district, using the school system as her primary weapon of choice. Time to expand my intelligence-gathering operation beyond neighborhood reconnaissance. Thursday morning, I started making phone calls to other base families in the area. Military networks run deep and word travels fast when someone's targeting our community. What I discovered made my blood run colder than a Nebraska winter in January. 12 families across 3 subdivisions were facing identical harassment patterns, same selective enforcement tactics, same school board challenges, same systematic exclusion from community activities. The coordination was too precise to be coincidental. Captain Martinez and Pinewood Estates. Both kids dropped from soccer teams due to scheduling conflicts with military family deployment schedules. Major Thompson in Cedar Ridge. Daughter removed from Honor Society because military families don't demonstrate sufficient long-term community commitment. Sergeant First Class Johnson in Oakwood. Son denied scholarship opportunities because selection committees questioned military family residential stability. Staff Sergeant Williams in Riverside. Family excluded from neighborhood barbecues and social events after complaints about military culture being too intense for civilian gatherings. The pattern wasn't random harassment. It was coordinated psychological warfare against military families, designed to force us out of civilian communities through social isolation and institutional discrimination. Here's something most people don't realize about community harassment campaigns. They require coordination, communication, and shared resources to be effective. Someone was organizing this operation with military-level precision. Translation: Linda had built a network of co-conspirators, and I was about to map every single connection. I spent the weekend creating what we call a network analysis, mapping connections between the harassment incidents across multiple neighborhoods. Linda Ashford's name appeared in 85% of the documented cases, either as a direct participant or as someone who'd raised concerns with relevant authorities. But the real breakthrough came Sunday evening when I cross-referenced timing data with base personnel records. Every escalation in harassment correlated with specific dates that painted a crystal-clear picture of motivation. The timeline told a story uglier than anything I'd seen in 3 combat deployments. September 15th, base maintenance contracts announced. September 18th, first HOA violations filed against military families. October 3rd, Linda's husband officially notified of contract rejection. October 5th, school board campaign against military families launched. This wasn't random neighborhood conflict. This was revenge, pure and simple. Monday morning brought Linda's most brazen escalation yet. I was loading the kids' backpacks into my truck when I noticed her standing in her driveway, smartphone raised like she was filming a documentary about suburban warfare. "Morning, Linda," I called out, keeping my voice friendly and professional. She didn't respond, just kept recording while speaking into her phone. "Yes, that's him right there. You can see the intimidation tactics, the way he parks that military vehicle, the aggressive body language. My neighbors and I don't feel safe." The woman was literally narrating my morning routine to someone on the phone while filming me loading school supplies into my pickup truck. The smell of fresh pine from the neighbor's Christmas tree lot mixed with the morning air, creating an absurd contrast to the surveillance theater happening in my driveway. Jake looked up at me with 10-year-old confusion. "Daddy, why is Mrs. Ashford taking pictures of us?" "Some people have too much time on their hands, buddy," I replied, giving Linda a cheerful wave. "Smile for the camera." That afternoon, things escalated to a whole new level of crazy. Officer Martinez showed up at my door again, this time with a stack of papers thicker than a military manual. "Colonel, I'm really sorry about this," he said, genuine embarrassment written across his face. "We've got multiple reports of harassment, stalking behavior, and intimidation tactics. I have to ask, have you been conducting surveillance on Mrs. Ashford's property?" I invited him inside for coffee and laid out my documentation folder. "Martinez, take a look at this timeline. Notice anything interesting about the complaint patterns?" The officer spent 20 minutes reviewing my intelligence analysis, his expression growing darker with each page. "This is systematic," he finally said. "She's filing reports faster than we can process them." 3 false police reports in 1 week, I confirmed, all claiming I'm stalking her when I've got security camera footage showing I haven't been within 50 feet of her property line. Here's something most people don't know about false police reports. Filing more than 2 in a 30-day period automatically triggers a review process. It's designed to catch people who abuse the system for personal vendettas. Translation: Linda had just painted a target on her own back by being too aggressive with fake complaints. Wednesday brought the nuclear option. I was in my home office reviewing quarterly training reports when my phone rang with a call that made my blood freeze. "Colonel Hendricks, this is Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Webb from Base Security. We've received some concerning reports about your fitness for command. I need you to come in for an interview." The taste of copper filled my mouth. Linda had escalated beyond civilian harassment into military channels, trying to destroy my career with false accusations about my mental stability and professional conduct. "What specific reports, ma'am?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Multiple civilian complaints about aggressive behavior, intimidation of neighbors, and potential PTSD-related incidents. There's also a suggestion that you're using your position to retaliate against civilian authority figures." I could hear the skepticism in Webb's voice, but protocol required investigation of any complaints against senior officers. Linda had weaponized military bureaucracy against me, using the very system designed to maintain discipline and good order. Thursday evening's revelation came through base intelligence networks that operate faster than civilian gossip chains. Captain Rodriguez called with information that connected every dot in Linda's operation. "Marcus, you need to hear this," he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "My wife works at the school district office. Linda Ashford has been coordinating with 3 other women to systematically target military families across multiple school districts." The conspiracy was bigger than I'd realized. Linda had built a network spanning 4 neighborhoods, 3 school districts, and 2 city councils. Her co-conspirators included Barbara Ellie from the school board, Margaret White from city planning, and Susan Torres from the county zoning commission. "They've got a shared document," Rodriguez continued, "color-coded spreadsheets tracking every military family in the area, with notes about vulnerabilities, deployment schedules, and which complaints work best against each family." The scope of the operation was breathtaking in its systematic evil. They'd turned harassment into a science, with data analysis and strategic planning that would have impressed Pentagon operational planners. Friday morning brought Linda's final mistake, the overreach that would ultimately destroy her entire operation. I was backing out of my driveway when she emerged from her house like a suburban missile, phone already dialing while she positioned herself directly behind my truck. "He's trying to run me over," she screamed into her phone. "Send police immediately. This veteran is having a mental breakdown and threatening civilians." My backup camera caught everything. Linda deliberately placing herself in harm's way while claiming I was trying to hurt her. But more importantly, my security system recorded her conversation before she got close to the truck. "This should be the final complaint we need," she'd said to someone on the phone. "Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood." Yeah, Linda Ashford had just confessed to conspiracy on camera, admitting her real goal was driving military families out of civilian communities through false accusations and systematic harassment. Game over. That recording changed everything. I sat in my home office Saturday morning, watching Linda's confession play back on my security system monitor while the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the satisfaction of watching an enemy expose their own operational plans. This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood. 23 years in military intelligence, and I'd never seen anyone hand over evidence of their own crimes with such efficiency. Linda had just documented conspiracy to interfere with military personnel, systematic harassment based on protected class status, and filing false police reports with intent to damage a military officer's career. But the real breakthrough came when I enhanced the audio and realized Linda wasn't talking to herself. Someone else was on that call, coordinating the operation from a different location. I spent the weekend conducting what we call multi-source intelligence fusion, combining my documentation with information from other affected families. The picture that emerged was bigger and more organized than I'd initially suspected. Linda Ashford wasn't just a vindictive neighbor with too much time and too little sense. She was the operational commander of a systematic campaign designed to force military families out of civilian communities through coordinated harassment across multiple jurisdictions. The evidence file I compiled would have made my intelligence analysts proud. 67 documented incidents across 12 families, 43 false or misleading complaints to various authorities, 28 violations of federal laws protecting military families, and 1 recorded confession of conspiracy. Here's something most civilians don't understand about military family protection laws. When you systematically target service members and their families, you're not just breaking local ordinances, you're violating federal statutes that carry serious criminal penalties. Translation: Linda had graduated from neighborhood nuisance to federal criminal without realizing she'd crossed that line. Monday morning brought the revelation that completed the picture. I was reviewing base security protocols when Lieutenant Colonel Webb called with information that turned this from harassment case into a matter of national security concern. "Marcus, we've been investigating those complaints against you," she said, her voice carrying the kind of professional tension that meant serious business. "What we found is disturbing. The complainants have been attempting to access classified information about base personnel, family locations, and deployment schedules." My blood turned to ice water. "They're conducting intelligence gathering operations against military families?" It gets worse. We traced the requests back to a network of individuals who've been systematically documenting military family patterns, children's school schedules, spouse employment information, and residential security measures. This isn't harassment, it's reconnaissance. The scope of Linda's operation suddenly made terrifying sense. She wasn't just trying to annoy military families out of the neighborhood. She was collecting actionable intelligence about base personnel and their vulnerabilities, information that could be used to target military operations or compromise base security. "Webb, I need to brief you on what I've documented from my end," I said, already reaching for my evidence files. "This is bigger than neighborhood complaints." Tuesday morning's security briefing revealed the full extent of the conspiracy. Linda's network had been operating for 8 months, systematically gathering information about military families across 3 states. Their data collection included detailed family schedules and movement patterns, children's school information and after-school activities, spouse employment locations and work schedules, home security measures and vulnerable access points, financial information including mortgage and debt details, medical information about family health issues. The operation showed sophisticated planning and coordination that suggested either professional training or guidance from someone with intelligence background. "Colonel," Webb concluded after reviewing my documentation, "you've uncovered a potential espionage operation targeting base personnel. This is no longer a civilian complaint issue. This is a federal investigation." Wednesday brought the authorization I'd been waiting for. As garrison commander, I now had official justification to investigate civilian interference with military operations and threats to base personnel security. The Military Family Protection Act provides specific authority for commanders to investigate and respond to systematic targeting of service members and their families. When civilians engage in coordinated harassment or intelligence gathering against military personnel, it becomes a matter of base security and operational readiness. Here's what most people don't realize about military command authority. It doesn't end at the base gates. When civilian activities threaten military families or compromise operational security, commanders have legal authority to investigate and respond through appropriate channels. Translation: Linda Ashford was about to discover that harassing a military family isn't the same as filing a noise complaint against your neighbor. Thursday afternoon, I made the call that would end Linda's operation permanently. This is Colonel Hendricks, Garrison Commander at Fort Carson. I'm formally requesting civilian intervention authority under Section 1482 of Title 18 United States Code. We have documented evidence of systematic interference with military operations and harassment of service member families. The authorization came back within 6 hours. Request approved. You are authorized to conduct formal investigation and pursue appropriate remedies under federal military protection statutes. Linda Ashford was about to learn the difference between civilian complaints and military justice. Friday morning at 0600 hours, my home office transformed into a military planning center that would have made the Pentagon proud. The smell of fresh printer ink mixed with strong coffee as I laid out evidence charts, timeline analyses, and legal documentation across every available surface. Operation Neighborhood Justice was officially underway. First priority, physical preparation of the Garrison Command Office. As base commander, I had authority to conduct formal interviews with civilians involved in matters affecting military personnel security. My conference room would need recording equipment, evidence displays, and proper legal documentation to ensure everything was admissible in federal court. The beauty of military planning is its systematic approach to complex problems. Every detail matters, every contingency gets covered, and every outcome gets documented with precision that would make an accountant weep with joy. I spent Saturday morning coordinating with base legal affairs, getting authorization for what we call civilian intervention protocols. Here's something most people don't understand about military law. When civilians systematically target service members, commanders have specific authority to investigate and respond under federal protection statutes. Translation: Linda's harassment campaign had triggered legal mechanisms specifically designed to protect military families from exactly this kind of coordinated attack. My JAG officer, Major Patricia Stevens, reviewed the evidence file with the kind of professional enthusiasm that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. "Colonel, this documentation is outstanding," she said, flipping through timeline charts and recorded evidence. "You've got systematic harassment, conspiracy to interfere with military operations, false police reports, and attempted compromise of base security. This is a federal prosecutor's dream case." Sunday afternoon brought the financial analysis that would determine restitution amounts. Military families don't just suffer emotional damage from systematic harassment. There are quantifiable economic impacts that courts take very seriously. Lost educational opportunities for children, $15,000 per family therapy and counseling costs, $8,000 per family relocation expenses for families forced to move, $12,000 per family. Lost work opportunities for spouses, $25,000 per family. Property value impacts, $18,000 per family. Multiplied across 12 affected families, Linda's conspiracy had caused nearly $400,000 in documented damages. Those numbers would get the attention of federal prosecutors who take military family protection laws seriously. Monday morning brought the coalition building phase. Military networks operate on trust, shared experience, and mutual support that civilian organizations can't match. When someone attacks one military family, they're attacking all of us. Captain Rodriguez coordinated contact with affected families across 3 subdivisions. Master Sergeant Johnson documented similar harassment patterns in his neighborhood. Lieutenant Colonel Davis provided legal expertise from his Reserve JAG background. Major Thompson's wife organized spouse support networks for families dealing with harassment trauma. By Tuesday evening, we had a military family coalition that included 12 primary affected families with documented harassment, 8 witness families who'd observed systematic targeting, 4 legal professionals with military family protection expertise, 2 mental health counselors specializing in harassment trauma, 1 investigative journalist interested in military family discrimination stories. The network effect was powerful and precisely coordinated. Linda had picked a fight with people trained in operational planning, systematic documentation, and coordinated response tactics. Wednesday brought the technical explanation that would make our case bulletproof. Military family protection laws exist because targeting service members through their families is a form of economic warfare designed to undermine military readiness and operational effectiveness. When civilians systematically harass military families, they're not just being neighborhood nuisances. They're interfering with national defense operations by creating stress, financial burden, and security vulnerabilities that affect service member performance and mission readiness. The Military Family Protection Act makes this federal jurisdiction because military effectiveness depends on stable, secure family environments that allow service members to focus on their duties without worrying about systematic targeting of their loved ones. Translation: messing with military families isn't just mean, it's a threat to national security that federal law takes very seriously. Thursday afternoon, I coordinated the final phase of operational preparation. Linda's harassment campaign was about to end with the kind of swift, decisive action that military planners execute when they've done their homework and prepared for every contingency. The formal summons would be issued Friday morning. Linda Ashford would be required to appear at my garrison command office for official questioning regarding civilian interference with military operations and systematic harassment of base personnel families. Her choice would be simple: appear voluntarily or face federal marshals with arrest warrants for conspiracy, harassment, and interference with military families protected under federal law. Either way, Linda's operation was about to discover what happens when civilians declare war on military families and lose. Friday morning brought Linda's most desperate gambit yet, an escalation so brazen it would have impressed enemy propagandists in terms of sheer audacity and complete disconnection from reality. I was reviewing final legal documents when my doorbell rang at 0730, followed immediately by aggressive pounding that rattled the windows. Through the peephole, I saw a man in a city inspector uniform, clipboard in hand, looking about as comfortable as a penguin in Death Valley. "Colonel Hendricks, I'm Dave Patterson from City Building Inspection. I need to conduct an immediate safety inspection of your property based on urgent complaints about structural violations and potential hazards." The smell of fresh-baked corruption wafted off this guy like cheap cologne. His hands shook slightly as he held the clipboard, and his eyes wouldn't meet mine directly. Classic tells of someone being paid to do something they know is wrong. "What specific violations are we discussing?" I asked, already reaching for my phone to record the interaction. "Unauthorized fence modifications, unsafe electrical work, and..." He consulted his clipboard with obvious reluctance. "Potential explosive materials storage related to your military background." Linda had just accused a U.S. Army colonel of storing explosives in a residential neighborhood. The woman had escalated beyond false police reports into federal terrorism accusations. I invited Patterson inside for coffee while I called my base legal officer. The inspector's relief at being treated professionally instead of aggressively suggested he knew exactly how ridiculous his urgent inspection request really was. "Sir, I have to be honest," Patterson said after his second cup of coffee. "I've never seen complaints this specific or this coordinated. Someone provided detailed property layouts, utility information, and even suggested where I should look for violations." "Someone gave you intelligence briefings on my property?" I asked, my mental alarm bells ringing louder than fire sirens. "Ma'am, I mean the complainant had photographs, architectural details, and even utility company records. This wasn't a normal neighbor complaint." Linda had conducted professional-level reconnaissance on my home, gathering detailed intelligence that she'd used to brief city officials with fabricated violations. This wasn't harassment anymore. It was systematic intelligence gathering and disinformation operations. The afternoon brought an escalation that confirmed Linda's desperation had reached dangerous levels. I was picking up the kids from school when Emma ran to my truck with tears streaming down her 8-year-old face. "Daddy, Mrs. Morrison said you might go to jail because you're dangerous to the neighborhood." The metallic taste of rage flooded my mouth. Linda had escalated to terrorizing military children with threats about their parents being arrested as dangerous criminals. Jake climbed into the passenger seat with the kind of confusion that breaks a father's heart. Tommy's mom said military dads sometimes snap and hurt people. She asked if you ever get angry and scary at home. Linda Ashford had crossed the line from harassment into psychological warfare against children. She was using 8-year-olds as weapons in her campaign against military families. That evening brought confirmation that Linda's operation had reached federal criminal levels. Captain Rodriguez called with intelligence that made my blood run cold as Arctic wind. "Marcus, my contacts at the school district uncovered something disturbing. Linda's been requesting detailed information about military children's emergency contact lists, medical information, and family security protocols." "What kind of medical information?" I asked, already knowing the answer would be bad. "Allergy information, medication schedules, therapy appointments, and psychological evaluation records for kids whose parents deployed." She claimed she needed it for neighborhood safety planning in case of emergencies. Linda was collecting actionable intelligence about military family vulnerabilities, information that could be used to target children specifically. This had evolved beyond harassment into potential threats against military dependents. Wednesday brought the confirmation I'd been dreading. Lieutenant Colonel Webb called with intelligence that elevated Linda's operation to the level of base security threat. "Colonel, we've traced some of those information requests to external sources with possible foreign connections. Someone's been paying for detailed intelligence about base personnel families, and Linda Ashford appears to be the collection coordinator." The room seemed to spin slightly. "Are you saying she's working for foreign intelligence?" "We're saying someone with resources and sophisticated operational knowledge is using her network to gather information about military families. Whether she knows who's really behind the operation is unclear, but the pattern suggests professional intelligence gathering rather than random harassment." Thursday brought the evidence that would end Linda's operation permanently. My security cameras captured her meeting with 2 individuals who conducted what appeared to be a reconnaissance briefing in her driveway, complete with photographs, documents, and what looked suspiciously like payment-changing hands. The recording quality was good enough to identify license plates, facial features, and conversation fragments that suggested coordination with outside agents interested in military family vulnerabilities. Linda Ashford had graduated from neighborhood nuisance to potential national security threat. The federal investigation would now involve agencies with acronyms that make criminals nervous and resources that make civilian legal problems feel like parking tickets. Friday morning brought the final authorization I needed to end this operation with extreme prejudice and complete legal authority. Friday afternoon's authorization came with the kind of federal backing that turns civilian harassment cases into national security investigations with serious criminal consequences. "Colonel Hendricks, this is Agent Patricia Morrison from the FBI's Domestic Security Division," the voice on my secure phone line announced with professional precision. "Your base security investigation has uncovered activities that require federal intervention under the Military Family Protection Act and related national security statutes." The taste of vindication mixed with coffee as I reviewed the expanded investigation parameters. Linda's harassment campaign had triggered federal agencies with resources that make local law enforcement look like mall security guards. "Agent Morrison, what's the scope of federal involvement?" "Your documentation revealed systematic intelligence gathering against military families by a network with possible foreign connections. We're treating this as potential espionage activity targeting base personnel and their vulnerabilities. Saturday morning brought Linda's final, desperate escalation, a move so spectacularly stupid it would have impressed Taliban propaganda ministers for sheer strategic incompetence. I was enjoying morning coffee on my back deck when the sound of multiple vehicles pulled up outside my house. Through the window, I counted 2 news vans, a radio station truck, and several cars full of people with cameras and clipboards. Linda had called a press conference in my front yard. The smell of exhaust fumes mixed with fresh morning air as reporters set up equipment, while Linda positioned herself at her property line like a general preparing for media warfare. She'd dressed for the occasion, navy blazer, professional hair, and the kind of serious expression that suggested she thought this was her moment of civic heroism. "Thank you for coming," Linda announced to the assembled media, her voice carrying across the neighborhood like a dinner bell, calling folks to watch a public execution. "Today, I'm exposing a pattern of military intimidation and veteran misconduct that threatens the safety of civilian families in our community." I watched through my kitchen window while sipping coffee and wondering if Linda had any idea she was being recorded by federal agents who'd been conducting surveillance on her activities for the past week. Her press conference performance was spectacular in its complete detachment from reality. She claimed military families were conducting psychological warfare against civilians, using combat training to intimidate neighbors, and exploiting veteran sympathy to avoid accountability for criminal behavior. Colonel Marcus Hendricks represents everything wrong with military privilege in civilian communities, Linda declared, pointing toward my house like she was identifying enemy positions. "This man has used military resources, government authority, and veteran status to harass and intimidate law-abiding citizens who simply want peaceful neighborhoods." The irony was thicker than Mississippi mud. Linda was conducting an actual media warfare operation while accusing me of psychological intimidation for parking in my own driveway. But her final statement crossed the line from harassment into direct threats against military families that would trigger federal criminal charges. "We demand the immediate removal of Colonel Hendricks from base command," Linda announced to the cameras, "and the establishment of military-free zones in civilian neighborhoods to protect our children from veterans who bring combat mentality into peaceful communities." Linda Ashford had just publicly called for discriminatory housing policies against veterans while being recorded by federal agents investigating her for systematic harassment of military families. The woman had literally handed federal prosecutors a confession of her discriminatory intent, delivered with professional lighting and broadcast quality audio. Sunday brought the response I'd been waiting for. Agent Morrison called with updates that confirmed Linda's press conference had provided the final evidence needed for federal criminal charges. "Colonel, that media event yesterday was the best thing that could have happened for our investigation," Morrison said, professional satisfaction evident in her voice. She confessed to systematic discrimination, stated clear intent to target military families, and did it on camera with multiple witnesses. Monday morning brought coordination with base security, federal investigators, and legal authorities that would end Linda's operation with the kind of swift, decisive action that military planners execute when they've prepared for every contingency. The formal summons was prepared, federal arrest warrants were signed, and Linda Ashford was about to discover what happens when civilian harassment campaigns trigger national security investigations. Tuesday brought surveillance footage that confirmed Linda's network had been conducting systematic intelligence gathering operations against 12 military families across 3 states. The scope of the operation was breathtaking in its organization and terrifying in its potential security implications. Wednesday evening, I received the call that would end this situation permanently. "Colonel, we're executing arrest warrants tomorrow morning for Linda Ashford and 3 co-conspirators," Agent Morrison informed me. "You're authorized to issue the formal command summons that will give her the choice between voluntary appearance and federal marshals." Thursday morning at 0800 hours, I placed the call that would bring Linda Ashford to my Garrison Command office to face federal charges for systematic harassment, conspiracy, and interference with military operations. "Mrs. Ashford, this is Colonel Marcus Hendricks. You are hereby officially summoned to appear at Fort Carson Garrison Command Office at 1400 hours for formal questioning regarding civilian interference with military family security and systematic harassment of base personnel. Linda's response was exactly what I expected from someone who'd spent months living in a fantasy world where military families were the villains and she was the neighborhood hero. You can't order me around. This is civilian jurisdiction, not your military base. Ma'am, federal law provides specific authority for military commanders to investigate systematic targeting of service member families. Your choice is simple. Appear voluntarily, or federal marshals will escort you here under arrest warrant. The silence on the phone lasted exactly 30 seconds before Linda Ashford realized her harassment campaign was about to end with her sitting in a military command office facing federal criminal charges. Game over. Thursday afternoon at 1400 hours sharp, Linda Ashford's white BMW pulled up to the Fort Carson main gate like a civilian vehicle approaching a military checkpoint in hostile territory. Through my command office window, I watched base security conduct the kind of thorough vehicle inspection normally reserved for high-threat situations. The smell of fresh printed documents filled my conference room as I made final preparations for what would either be a voluntary interview or the beginning of federal criminal proceedings. Evidence charts covered 3 walls, timeline analyses occupied 2 tables, and recording equipment documented everything for federal prosecutors. Linda's arrival at my command office was a study in civilian shock meeting military reality. Base security escorted her through corridors lined with portraits of Medal of Honor recipients while she clutched her purse like a shield against reality she'd never imagined facing. "Mrs. Ashford," I said as she was seated across from my desk, "thank you for appearing voluntarily. Present for this interview are Agent Morrison from the FBI, Major Stevens from Base Legal Affairs, and Captain Rodriguez as witness coordinator." Linda's face went through color changes that would have impressed a chameleon. She'd expected to file another complaint about military intimidation. Instead, she was facing federal agents in a military command office with evidence of her crimes displayed on every available wall surface. "I demand to know why I'm being treated like a criminal," Linda announced with the kind of manufactured indignation that works on civilian customer service representatives but fails spectacularly against federal investigators. "Ma'am," Agent Morrison replied with professional patience, "you're here because our investigation into systematic harassment of military families has revealed potential federal crimes. We'll start with your recorded confession from last Friday." The audio recording filled the room with Linda's own voice. "This should be the final complaint we need. Once they remove him from base command, we can get the rest of these military families out of our neighborhood." Linda's expression suggested she was realizing that private conversations aren't actually private when conducted next to security cameras that record everything within 50 feet of their operational range. "Mrs. Ashford," I continued, gesturing toward the evidence wall, "these charts document 47 separate harassment incidents against 12 military families over 8 months. Can you explain this systematic pattern?" The wall display was impressive in its comprehensive documentation. Photographs of every citation, timeline charts showing coordinated attacks, financial calculations of damages, and recorded evidence of conspiracy spanning multiple jurisdictions. Linda's response was exactly what military planners expect from enemy combatants when confronted with overwhelming evidence of their operational failures. "This is military intimidation. You can't treat civilians like prisoners of war." "Ma'am," Major Stevens interjected with legal precision, "the Military Family Protection Act provides specific authority for investigating civilian interference with military operations. Your systematic targeting of service member families constitutes federal crimes regardless of your intent or understanding of applicable laws." The beauty of military documentation became evident as we walked Linda through her own operation step by step. Every false police report was documented with dates, times, and witness statements. Every HOA violation was cross-referenced with identical civilian infractions that received warnings instead of citations. Every school board complaint was analyzed for discriminatory language and systematic exclusion tactics. But the moment that ended Linda's denial came when Agent Morrison activated the video display showing surveillance footage from Linda's own press conference. "We demand the immediate removal of Colonel Hendricks from base command and the establishment of military-free zones in civilian neighborhoods to protect our children from veterans who bring combat mentality into peaceful communities." Mrs. Ashford, Agent Morrison stated with federal authority, "That statement constitutes public advocacy for discriminatory housing policies against veterans protected under federal fair housing laws. It's also evidence of systematic intent to target military families based on their service member status." Linda's face drained of color as she realized her media warfare operation had been recorded by federal agents conducting surveillance on her activities. Her moment of civic heroism had become evidence of federal civil rights violations. The final piece of evidence broke whatever remained of Linda's resistance to reality. "These photographs show you meeting with individuals who provided detailed intelligence about military family vulnerabilities," I explained, pointing to surveillance images that captured her coordination with outside agents. "Federal investigation has identified potential foreign connections to intelligence gathering operations targeting base personnel." Linda Ashford collapsed in her chair as the scope of federal investigation became clear. She'd thought she was fighting neighborhood parking disputes. Instead, she'd stumbled into national security territory that carried serious criminal penalties. "Mrs. Ashford," I said, delivering the line I'd been waiting 8 months to speak, "you called police on me for parking in my own driveway. Now you're facing federal civil rights violations, conspiracy charges, and potential espionage-related crimes. Sometimes the system works exactly as designed." The room fell silent except for the sound of Linda's world crashing down around her like a controlled demolition of her entire operation. Outside the conference room windows, the American flag flew at full staff in the Colorado wind, while federal agents prepared arrest warrants for the civilians who'd declared war on military families and lost. The aftermath moved with the efficiency of a well-planned military operation. Within 72 hours, federal prosecutors filed charges against Linda Ashford and 3 co-conspirators under multiple statutes: systematic harassment of protected classes, conspiracy to interfere with military operations, false police reports, and violation of federal fair housing laws protecting veterans. Linda's reaction to facing potential federal prison time was exactly what you'd expect from someone who'd spent months living in a fantasy world where military families were the villains. She immediately attempted to negotiate by offering information about the outside agents who'd been coordinating her intelligence gathering operations. Federal investigators discovered Linda's network had collected detailed information about military families across 3 states, including children's schedules, spouse employment details, home security measures, and family vulnerability assessments. The scope of the operation suggested coordination with entities interested in targeting military personnel through their families. The financial settlement reflected the serious nature of systematic discrimination against military families. Federal court ordered $400,000 in restitution distributed among affected families, with additional penalties for civil rights violations and conspiracy charges. Linda lost her HOA position, her husband lost his city planning role, and their co-conspirators faced career-ending consequences for participating in discriminatory harassment campaigns. But the real victory went beyond financial compensation or criminal consequences. The federal investigation established clear precedent that systematic targeting of military families triggers serious legal protections with teeth sharp enough to bite civilian harassment operations. Here's what every military family should know about the Military Family Protection Act. When civilians engage in coordinated harassment based on your service member status, federal law provides specific protections that make such discrimination a serious crime with real consequences. Documentation is key. Keep records of every incident, every complaint, every pattern of selective enforcement. The Maplewood subdivision transformed almost overnight. The discriminatory HOA board was dissolved and replaced with inclusive leadership that included military family representation. New policies prohibited selective enforcement and established clear procedures for addressing legitimate concerns without targeting protected classes. My kids bounced back with the resilience that military children develop from growing up in families that face challenges head-on and overcome them together. Emma reclaimed her safety patrol captain position and was selected for advanced academic programs. Jake joined student government and helped establish an anti-bullying initiative that protected military kids from harassment based on their family's service. Dad's dementia symptoms actually improved in the supportive environment that emerged after Linda's operation ended. The stress of constant conflict had been affecting his cognitive clarity, but peaceful home surroundings allowed him to focus on his tomato garden and share Vietnam stories with neighborhood kids who now viewed him as a local hero rather than a threat. Sarah returned early from her Germany deployment when Base Command recognized that family stability was essential for military effectiveness. The kids' excitement at having both parents home for the first time in months reminded me why protecting military families matters for more than just legal or philosophical reasons. It's about preserving the foundation that allows service members to focus on their missions. The broader impact extended beyond our neighborhood. The federal investigation led to establishment of the Military Family Welcome Network, a program that helps service members integrate into civilian communities while providing clear procedures for addressing harassment or discrimination. The program now operates in 12 states and has prevented dozens of harassment campaigns from escalating to criminal levels. Base community relations improved dramatically once civilians understood that military families bring stability, expertise, and economic benefits to local communities rather than threats or problems. Property values in areas with strong military family presence actually increased as reputation for supporting veterans attracted quality residents who appreciate the values and discipline that military families contribute. Fort Carson established an annual Community Appreciation Festival that celebrates civilian-military cooperation and demonstrates the positive impact of veterans in local communities. The festival raises funds for scholarship programs, veteran support services, and community improvement projects that benefit everyone regardless of their military connection. Linda Ashford ultimately served 18 months in federal prison for conspiracy and civil rights violations. Her co-conspirators received shorter sentences but faced professional consequences that ended their ability to hold positions of authority over housing, education, or community planning matters. The investigation revealed connections to foreign-funded organizations interested in sowing discord between military and civilian communities, though Linda appeared to be an unwitting asset rather than a deliberate foreign agent. The broader intelligence operation was disrupted, and several foreign nationals were expelled from the country for activities targeting military families. Every military family deserves to live in peace without facing systematic harassment for their service to our country. The Military Family Protection Act exists because targeting service members through their families undermines national defense and violates fundamental American values of fairness and respect. If you're facing HOA harassment, selective enforcement, or systematic targeting because of your military connection, document everything and contact base legal services immediately. Federal protections exist, but they require proper documentation and understanding of your rights under military family protection laws. Share your HOA nightmare stories in the comments below. You'd be amazed how many military families face similar harassment from civilians who think veteran status makes us fair targets for their personal frustrations. And subscribe for more stories about military justice prevailing over civilian harassment. We're just getting started exposing the people who think they can target our families without consequences. Hit that notification bell so you never miss a story about Karens getting exactly what they deserve when they mess with military families. Next week, how I used my security clearance to expose a contractor fraud scheme that was stealing $3 million from veteran benefits. If you think Linda was bad, wait until you meet the city official who tried to shut down our base because he thought veterans get too many unfair advantages. Remember, military families serve our country, but we don't have to tolerate harassment from civilians who mistake our dedication for weakness. Sometimes the best way to support our troops is by ensuring their families live in peace and dignity. Welcome home, and thank you for your service, both to those who serve and those who support the military families protecting our freedom.
Thanks for hanging out with us on HOA Stories, where the HOA Karens meet their match. If this story had you cheering or cringing, go ahead and like the video, drop a comment with your reaction, and hit subscribe so you're ready for the next wild HOA tale.